The air in the chamber was thick with a cloying scent of lotus blossom incense, meant to mask the stench of sickness, but to Lysandra, it only smelled of decay, of endings. She lay on her divan, her body a frail, aching vessel that had long since betrayed her. Across the spacious room, in the grand four-poster bed they had once shared, her husband of 20 years was dying, Kalen, once the most celebrated scholar in the Azure dynasty, now a parchment-skinned ghost of his former self. She had loved him. The thought was a bitter drag in the bottom of her cup. She had loved him with a ferocity that had scorched her own soul, had built him from a brilliant but impoverished scholar into the powerful chancellor of the exchequer. She had used her family's influence, her own sharp wit in commerce, and every ounce of her strength to clear the path for him, believing his success was their shared dream. The wet, rattling cough shook his frame. The court physician had left hours ago, his silence more telling than any prognosis. The poison was doing its final, meticulous work. It had been a slow, insidious thing, introduced drop by drop over months. She had only realized the truth a week ago, too late for antidotes, her own body already singing the same toxic tune. His eyes, once the color of warm honey and full of intellectual fire, were now clouded with pain and a strange, restless clarity. They found her across the room. Lysandra, her name was a whisper, a breath stolen from the tomb, a foolish, desperate hope flickered within her. Perhaps at the end, all pretenses would fall away. Perhaps he would remember the young woman who defied her noble family for him, the wife who stood by him through political storms, the lover who had cherished him. "The greatest regret of my life," he began, his voice gaining a sliver of strength, a final surge of venom, "was marrying you for my future." The words were not a whisper. They were a hammer blow, striking the air from her lungs. She could only stare, paralyzed. "If I could do it all over again," he continued, his gaze drifting past her, focusing on a cherished memory she was not part of, "I wouldn't let you get close to me. The only one I ever loved was Seraphine." Seraphine, her half-sister. The woman with the face of a porcelain doll and the heart of a viper. The sister she had protected, dressed in silks, and included in her life, only to have her weave a web of subtle whispers and clandestine glances that had slowly stolen her husband's heart. A hot, coppery tide surged up Lysandra's throat. She choked it back, the effort making her vision swim. The poison, or the betrayal. They were one and the same now. She forced the single, damning word past her lips, the only accusation that mattered. Thief. Kalen's eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something not remorse, but a sort of weary triumph. He had finally spoken his truth. "All right," he breathed, as if granting her a petty victory. How easily the heart changes. Outside the latticed window, the peach trees they had planted together in their first spring bloomed with obscene vitality, their petals dancing in the gentle breeze, indifferent to the death happening within. They were the same trees, but they were not. Nothing was. She closed her eyes, the image of the smiling blossoms imprinted on her dying mind. The world faded, not with a bang, but with the soft, cruel whisper of a spring wind, then light. Not the pearlescent light of the afterlife, but the gentle, morning light of a spring day, filtering through the silk curtains of her childhood bedchamber. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming wisteria from the garden below. The weight of sickness was gone. The ache of betrayal was a fresh, sharp wound, but her body was young, strong. She sat bolt upright, her hands flying to her face, her arms. They were smooth, unlined. She was in her bed in the Silverwood Manor, in the room she had occupied before her marriage. A familiar voice, sharp with imperiousness, rang out from the courtyard below. "You impudent beggar! How dare you block our young lady's carriage? Move, or I'll have the guards whip you." Lysandra's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. She knew this day. She scrambled from the bed, her legs steady beneath her, and rushed to the ornate balcony. Below, the scene was exactly as she remembered, yet now viewed through a lens of horrific clarity. Her family's crest, a silver phoenix, on an azure field adorned the carriage door. Standing before the skittish horses was a young man in travel-stained, humble robes, his posture proud even in his bowing. He was slender, his features sharp with intelligence and hunger. Kalen. And just stepping down from the carriage, her face a perfect mask of affronted nobility, was Seraphine. Her half-sister, a year younger, was already a masterpiece of calculated beauty. A gold hairpin shaped like a butterfly trembled in her intricately styled hair. "Ugh," He does stink, Seraphine said, her voice carrying a theatrical lilt of disgust. She waved a delicate hand before her nose. He's probably riddled with disease. Someone, get him away from me. He's ruining the air. This was the moment. The catalyst. In her first life, Lysandra's heart had ached with pity at the sight of the proud young scholar brought so low. She had intervened, chiding the servant for his harshness, and had offered Kalen not just coin, but kindness, a chance. It was the first thread she had handed him, the one he would use to weave the rope that hanged her. This time, she stood frozen on the balcony, a specter at her own past. Her fingers clenched around the cool wooden railing until her knuckles turned white. She watched, her heart a block of ice in her chest. "You misunderstand, my lady," Kalen said, his voice earnest, the voice that had once spoken sonnets to her soul. "I am no beggar. I am a scholar on my way to take the imperial examinations of the capital. I was set upon by bandits in the Serpent's Pass. They took everything." He reached into his tattered robe and pulled out a scroll, holding it out like a sacred relic. "This is my letter of introduction, bearing the seal of the Grand Academy of Cloudrise. Please, I beg your indulgence." Seraphine didn't even look at it. She flicked her wrist, and the scroll was knocked from his hand by a guard, tumbling into the dust of the street where it was promptly trodden by a passing cart. "So what if you have papers?" she sneered, her lip curling. "You're still just a beggar from the dirt." She paused, a cruel idea sparkling in her eyes. She nodded to her maid, who fished a single, low-denomination copper coin from a purse. With a contemptuous flick, Seraphine sent the coin spinning through the air. It landed in the dirt at Kalen's feet, kicking up a tiny puff of dust. "Here," she said, her voice dripping with false magnanimity. "I shall be generous. Since you're a scholar, buy yourself a bun. Now, get out of my sight." The coin lay there, a tiny, gleaming insult. Kalen stood utterly still, his body rigid. Lysandra could see the muscles in his jaw working, the flush of humiliation rising from his neck to his cheeks. He was a man of immense pride, and Seraphine had just ground it into the mud. He would not pick it up. He could not. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The fury in his eyes was a living thing, and Seraphine, blind to the depth of the resentment she had just sown, turned and swept back into her carriage, without a second glance. Lysandra watched him, this man who would become her murderer. She saw the shame and the rage war within him, and a quiet, grim satisfaction settled in her soul. This was not the meeting of star-crossed lovers. This was the first strike in a war she had already lost once. Let him taste the bitterness. Let him choke on it. The sound of light, hurried footsteps on the staircase behind her broke her trance. The door to her chamber slid open, and Seraphine herself stood there, her expression now one of sisterly concern. "Lysandra, there you are. I heard you were unwell." She glided into the room, the scent of jasmine perfume trailing her. "Did you see that dreadful creature outside? The audacity. Blocking the road like he owned it. I had to send him off." She gave a delicate shudder. "Weren't you supposed to go to the Sunstone Temple to pray for Father's health today? Why are you still here?" Lysandra turned from the balcony, her face a carefully schooled mask of placid indifference. The memory of Kalen's deathbed words, "the only one I ever loved was Seraphine," echoed in her mind, but she shoved them down, deep into the icy calm that was now her core. She looked at her half-sister, truly looked at her. She saw the calculated tilt of her head, the way her eyes subtly scanned the room for any new luxury or trinket, the faint, smug satisfaction that lurked beneath the concern. How had she never seen it before? "I am feeling unwell, sister," Lysandra said, her voice hoarse, though not from any physical malady. It was the ghost of poison in her throat. "I won't be going to the temple today." Seraphine's perfectly shaped eyebrows furrowed in a show of disappointment. "Oh, what a pity. The spring air would have done you good." "Very well, rest then. I shall go and offer prayers on your behalf." Liar, Lysandra thought. She was going to see and be seen, to flutter her butterfly hairpin at the sons of other noble families who frequented the temple gardens. Once Seraphine had left, chattering to her maid about the poor quality of the roadside vermin, Lysandra did not rest. A new, fierce energy coursed through her. She had been given a second life. A chance to not just avoid her fate, but to reshape it entirely. She changed into a simple, unadorned dress of gray silk, one that would not draw attention, and slipped out through the servants' quarters, pulling a light cloak over her head. She had to be sure. She had to witness the consequences of her inaction. She found a secluded bench in a public garden that offered a clear view of the long avenue leading from the Silverwood Manor. She sat, a statue amidst the blooming peonies, and waited. It wasn't long before she saw Kalen. He was walking slowly, his head down, his shoulders slumped in a way that was both defeated and furious. He stopped near a merchant's stall, and she watched as he tried to sell the very book he had once told her was his most prized possession, a commentary on statecraft by a renowned philosopher. The merchant waved him away dismissively. Kalen's face tightened, and he shoved the book back into his satchel as if it were a venomous snake. This was the man whose elegant calligraphy and sharp insights would one day captivate an emperor. He was a seed, but this time, she would ensure he was planted in barren soil. As she watched him retreat into the bustling crowd, a figure stepping out from a nearby tea house caught her eye. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a predator's grace that was utterly out of place among the leisurely nobles. He wore the dark, practical robes of a military officer, but the quality of the silk and the subtle, powerful aura he projected marked him as someone of high rank. His gaze was not on the colorful stalls or the chattering people. It was fixed intently on the retreating form of Kalen, and then, as if feeling the weight of her own stare, his head turned. His eyes met hers across the crowded street. They were not the honeyed warmth of Kalen's. They were the color of a stormy sky, sharp, intelligent, and penetrating. For a heart-stopping moment, he held her gaze, and a jolt, like a spark from a flint, passed through her. There was no recognition in his eyes, only a deep, unsettling intensity, as if he could see right through her cloak, through her youthful skin, to the weary, vengeful soul beneath. Then, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, turned, and melted back into the shadows of the tea house, leaving Lysandra with a racing heart and a whirlwind of new questions. Who was he? And why was he watching Kalen? The game had changed. The board was the same, but she was no longer the only player who knew the stakes. The stormy-eyed stranger's gaze lingered in Lysandra's mind long after he had disappeared. It was a look that saw too much, a shard of ice in the warm spring day. It shattered the simple narrative of revenge she had begun to construct. The board was not just reset. New, unknown pieces had been placed. She rose from the bench, her limbs feeling strangely heavy. The encounter with the past was no longer a private haunting. It felt like a public performance with an audience she hadn't anticipated. Who was he? A spy for a rival family? A creditor Kalen had duped? The possibilities buzzed in her head like angry hornets. She returned to Silverwood Manor through the main gate, her cloak still drawn. The servants bowed, their demeanor unchanged. To them, she was still the revered, somewhat sheltered eldest daughter of Marquis Silverwood. They saw the fine gray silk, not the scars on her soul, and the main courtyard. She nearly collided with Seraphine, who was returning from her temple visit, her cheeks flushed with excitement, not piety. Lysandra, you're feeling better? You missed such a delightful morning, Seraphine chirped, linking her arm through Lysandra's with a familiarity that now felt like a cage. Lord Fenris's son was there. He asked after you, but I told him you were sadly indisposed. She said it with a sly, conspiratorial smile, as if sharing a secret, but the underlying message was clear. I was there in your place. I captured his attention. In her first life, Lysandra would have missed the nuance, too trusting, too focused on her own world. Now, she heard the subtle boast as clearly as a temple bell. How kind of you to manage my social obligations, sister, Lysandra replied, her voice flat. She subtly extricated her arm. I am sure you represented the family perfectly. Seraphine's smile tightened slightly at the edges. I always try. But you look pale. You should rest. With a final, assessing glance, she fluttered away, her butterfly hairpin catching the sun. Lysandra retreated to the sanctuary of her chambers. The confrontation with her past had left her drained, but the stranger's face fueled a new, restless energy. She couldn't simply watch Kalen and Seraphine from the shadows. She needed information. She needed power of her own. Over the next few days, she began a quiet campaign. She started by feigning a newfound interest in the family's affairs, asking her father, the Marquis, seemingly innocent questions about the court, about trade routes, about the military appointments. Marquis Silverwood, a robust man with a keen mind currently preoccupied with a minor border dispute, was initially surprised but pleased by his daughter's curiosity. Thinking of becoming my advisor, my dear? He joked one evening over dinner. Perhaps I am, father, she had replied, meeting his gaze steadily. A Silverwood should understand the pillars that support our house, should she not? He had studied her then, his jovial expression softening into something more thoughtful. Indeed, she should. Meanwhile, she used her pin money to discreetly hire a street-smart urchin named Jean. He was quick, invisible, and knew the underbelly of the capital. His task was simple: follow Kalen. Report on where he went, who he saw, how he survived. The reports were bleak. Kalen had found lodging in a vermin-infested flophouse in the slums of the city's Inkstone district, so named for the aspiring scholars who crowded its cheap tenements. He spent his days in the public archives, reading by the light of a single tallow candle he had to pay for by the hour. He tried to tutor richer, less talented students for coin, but his pride often got in the way, leading to arguments and dismissed offers. He was hungry, desperate, and increasingly bitter. The brilliant, charismatic man she had known was being sanded down by the grit of poverty. It was a perfect crucible for the monster he would become. Weeks bled into a month. The capital began to swell with scholars and their entourages for the upcoming imperial examinations. The air crackled with a mixture of hope, anxiety, and rampant ambition. Lysandra moved through it all with a placid exterior, a young noblewoman awaiting her fate, while inside, the embers of her past life smoldered. One afternoon, as she was in the manor's library studying a map of the northern trade routes, a region she remembered would be crucial in the coming years, a commotion erupted in the front hall. She heard her father's booming voice, louder and more animated than it had been in weeks. Curious, she stepped out into the gallery overlooking the main hall. Below, Marquis Silverwood was clasping forearms with a man in travel-stained but fine-quality leather armor. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and when he removed his helmet, Lysandra's breath caught. It was him. The stranger from the tea-house stepped close. He was even more imposing. His features were sharp, carved as if from granite, with a faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His storm-gray eyes were alert, missing nothing. This was no mere officer. This was a man of command. "Cashin," her father was saying, clapping the man on the shoulder. "By the 9 dragons, it's good to see you in one piece." The reports from the Scarlet Marches were concerning. The reports were exaggerated, my Lord Marquis. The man Cashin replied, his voice a low, resonant baritone that carried easily to where Lysandra stood hidden. "A skirmish with Karakaitai raiders. They were repelled. I've brought the tribute and the signed treaties for the Emperor." "And your father? The Duke of Ironhold? Is he well?" A shadow, fleeting but profound, passed over Cashin's face. "He passed the winter, my lord. A fever. I am now the Duke." Marquis Silverwood's face fell.
"Ah, question."
"My condolences. He was a good man and a great friend." He sighed. "So, the Wolf of Ironhold returns to the capital not just a victorious general, but a duke. The court will be buzzing. Duke Cashin of Ironhold." The name hit Lysandra like a physical blow. She knew of him, of course. Everyone did. His father held the most crucial defensive territory in the Empire, the mountainous pass of Ironhold that separated the Azure dynasty from the nomadic horse lords of the Karakaitai. Cashin had earned his moniker, the Wolf, for his ferocity and cunning in battle. He was a legend, a figure from songs and military dispatches. In her first life, she had been so consumed with Kalen's rise in the civil administration that she had paid the military heroes little mind. She remembered hearing that Duke Cashin had never married, dying on the frontier in a later, greater invasion. He had been a specter in her past life. And he had been watching Kalen. Why, her father was leading Cashin towards a study. "You must stay with us, of course. The Ironhold residence in the capital has been shuttered for years. Nonsense to open it for one man. You'll be our guest." "You are too kind, Lord Silverwood," Cashin said, his gaze sweeping the hall, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed to pause on the shadowed gallery where she stood. Lysandra pressed herself back against the wall, her heart hammering. Had he seen her? She slipped back to her room, her mind reeling. Duke Cashin was now a guest under her roof. The game had not just changed, the board had been upended. The following days were a lesson in taut nerves. Cashin was a quiet, respectful presence, often closeted with her father or at the palace. But his aura filled the manor. Servants spoke in hushed, admiring tones. Seraphine, of course, was instantly captivated, deploying her full arsenal of charms whenever he was near, batting her eyelashes and laughing a little too brightly at his few, reserved words. Cashin was polite but distant, his stormy eyes seeming to look through her performances as if they were rice paper. Lysandra avoided him assiduously. His presence was a variable she couldn't calculate, a reminder that the world was much larger than her personal tragedy. But fate, it seemed, had other ideas. She found him one evening in the library, standing before the very map of the northern trade routes she had been studying. He was tracing a route with a calloused finger. "This path is vulnerable," he said without turning, as if he had known she was there all along. His voice was calm, conversational. "The Karakaitai don't just raid for plunder. They seek to strangle our supply lines. A caravan of silk is just as valuable as a company of soldiers to them." Lysandra froze in the doorway. She could retreat, but that would be an admission of fear. She stepped inside. "I would think they would target the military supply caravans first," she said, keeping her voice even. He turned then, those gray eyes pinning her. "They do. But they're also cunning. They target the luxury goods to create fear and economic instability in the capital. It weakens the emperor's position, makes the merchant class nervous. War is not always fought with swords, my lady." He knew. He had to know she was the one watching him that day. This was not a casual observation. It was a test. "And do you always study the economic underpinnings of your enemy, Your Grace?" she asked, meeting his gaze. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "I study everything, Lady Lysandra. It is how one survives." He turned back to the map. "And how one protects what is important." The air between them was thick with unspoken questions. "Why were you watching Kaelin? What do you know?" Before she could formulate a response, a servant appeared at the door, breathless. "My lady, Your Grace. Forgive the interruption, but the examination results are being announced." The moment shattered. The outside world, with its relentless march, had intruded. Lysandra's focus snapped back to her primary purpose. Kaelin. This was the moment his destiny was to be sealed. She followed the servant to the main hall, Cashin a silent, formidable presence at her side. Her father and mother were already there, and Seraphine was practically vibrating with excitement. A household steward was reading from a hastily acquired copy of the posted results. "And passing the palace examination, ranked 78th, is Kaelin of Oakhaven." A silence fell. 78th. It was a pass. It meant he would receive a minor official post, likely a 9th-rank magistracy in some remote, backwater province. It was a world away from the third-place flower and plume rank he had achieved in their first life, the rank that had catapulted him into the Emperor's immediate notice. Seraphine's face fell comically. 78th? She repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. That's practically a failure. I thought he was supposed to be brilliant." All her earlier flirtatious interest, built on the expectation of a rising star, evaporated in an instant. Lysandra said nothing. She felt a cold triumph. Without her silver to buy him quiet lodging, nourishing food, and new robes, without her father's influence to smooth his path and introduce him to the right examiners, without her unwavering support, his brilliance had been dimmed by the harsh realities of survival. He was merely a face in the crowd, a respectable showing for a man with no patronage, Marquis Silverwood mused. "He'll make a decent local official, I suppose." It was then that a gatekeeper hurried in. "My lord, the scholar Kaelin is at the gate. He wishes to pay his respects to the Lady Seraphine." Seraphine scoffed. "Tell him I am unavailable." The audacity. To come here after such a mediocre result. But Lysandra knew. This was part of the script. In her first life, he had come to thank her, the one who had saved him. This time, he was here for Seraphine, the one who had humiliated him. His pride would not let him forget that single copper coin. He would see her contempt as a challenge, a debt to be repaid by claiming her. "See him in?" Lysandra said, her voice cutting through Seraphine's protests. Everyone looked at her in surprise. "Why ever would you want me to see that creature?" Seraphine whined. "Because, sister," Lysandra said, a slow, cold smile touching her lips for the first time in this new life. "I wish to see how a man of mediocre talent pays his respects." She needed to see this. She needed to witness the beginning of the twisted bond that would one day lead to her murder. Kaelin was ushered in. He had managed to acquire a clean, though still simple, robe. He held himself with a strained dignity, but the hunger in his eyes was sharper than ever. He bowed deeply, first to her father, then his gaze sought out Seraphine. "Lady Seraphine," he began, his voice earnest. "A drop of grace must be repaid with a fountain." You assisted me on the road that day. It was a moment of kindness I have not forgotten. Now that I have passed the examinations, however humbly, I wish to formally express my gratitude. It was a lie, so transparent it was almost pathetic. Seraphine had been cruel, not kind. But he was reframing the narrative, turning her contempt into a catalyst for his ambition. He was laying claim to her. Seraphine looked bored. It was a single coin, scholar. Do not trouble yourself. But Kalen's eyes burned with a possessive intensity that made even Seraphine shift uncomfortably. It was a moment that changed my life, my lady. I shall never forget it. Lysandra watched, the cold smile still on her face.
Yes.
Remember it. Covet her. Let that be the chain that binds you both. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Cashin. He was not watching Kalen or Seraphine. His stormy gaze was fixed on her, studying her expression, reading the cold satisfaction in her eyes as if it were a fascinating text. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving hers. The message in his gaze was clear and unsettling. I see you, Lysandra Silverwood. And I see your game. The air in the Silverwood Hall was thick with unspoken tensions after Kalen's departure. Seraphine flounced away in a huff, mortified that such a lowly man had dared to fix his ambitions upon her. Marquis Silverwood retired to his study, muttering about the tiresome pride of impoverished scholars. But Lysandra remained, feeling the weight of Cashin's gaze like a physical touch. He did not approach her. He merely finished his wine, placed the cup on a passing servant's tray, and gave her one last, inscrutable look before striding off towards the guest wing. The message was clear. He was observing, cataloging, and she was an object of intense interest. The encounter left her unsettled. Her plan had been simple: sever her connection to Kalen and let him and Seraphine entangle themselves in a mutually destructive dance. Cashin was a wild predator who had wandered onto the stage, and she didn't know if he was there to watch the play or tear the actors apart. She needed to regain control. The next morning, she summoned Jean, the urchin she had hired. The scholar, Kalen, she said, handing the boy a small pouch of silver. I need to know more than where he sleeps and what he eats. I need to know who he speaks to. Specifically, if he has any contact with anyone from the Karakaitai delegation or anyone who deals with them. Jin's eyes widened slightly. Spying on a scholar was one thing, spying on potential foreign agents was another. But the silver was persuasive. He nodded sharply and vanished. Lysandra turned her attention inward, to the manor itself. She began to take a more active role in its management, citing a desire to learn from her mother. She reviewed the household accounts, noticing the subtle siphoning of funds by the concubine, Leora Seraphine's mother, to buy her daughter expensive trinkets and fabric. In her first life, she would have overlooked it, deeming it beneath her notice. Now, she meticulously documented it. Knowledge was currencied a few days later, as she was in the gardens inspecting the new blooms of midnight orchids, a rare import her father doted on. Cashin found her. He moved so quietly she didn't hear him until he was a few feet away. You have a keen eye for strategy, Lady Lysandra, he said, his voice low. He nodded towards the orchids. A difficult bloom to cultivate. It requires specific conditions, patience, and the ruthless removal of any blight that threatens it. She straightened, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Are we still discussing flowers, Your Grace? We are discussing whatever you wish to discuss, he replied, his stormy eyes holding hers. I merely note that you seem to understand that some threats cannot be reasoned with. They must be excised. He knew about Kalen. He had to. How much did he know? And what blight do you see threatening the Silverwood Garden, Your Grace? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. A blight often comes from unexpected places, he said, stepping closer. The scent of leather and cold steel clung to him. A seemingly harmless insect can carry a poison that kills the strongest tree. I have seen it on the frontier. A single, compromised link in the supply chain can lead to the fall of an entire fortress. He was talking about Kalen.
But why?
What was Kalen to him? Why are you telling me this? The question escaped her, stripped of its careful politeness. Cashin's gaze intensified. Because I believe we may have a common interest. And because I find it remarkable that a noble lady who has rarely left the capital seems to possess the strategic mind of a frontier general. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted near the manor. Raised voices. Seraphine's, shrill with outrage, and another, deeper voice she recognized with a jolt of dread. She and Cashin exchanged a glance and moved towards the sound. They found Seraphine in the main courtyard, facing a determined and impeccably dressed Kalen. He was not in scholar's robes anymore, but in the formal attire of a ninth-rank official. Utterly unacceptable. Seraphine was shrieking. I will not be harassed in my own home. Harassment. Kalen's voice was calm, but a feverish light burned in his eyes. I come to formally court you, Lady Seraphine, as is my right as a ranked official. Our first meeting was inauspicious. I wish to correct that impression. I am no longer the man you met on the road. You are exactly the same man, she shot back. A title and a cheap robe don't change the stink of the gutter. Lysandra watched, coldly fascinated. This was progressing faster than she had anticipated. Kalen's obsession, born from humiliation, was festering into a dangerous fixation. Seraphine. Marquis Silverwood's voice boomed from the doorway. Compose yourself. He turned to Kalen, his expression unreadable. Magistrate Kalen. This is indeed unexpected. My Lord Marquis, Kalen bowed. I apologize for the scene. My intentions are honorable. I wish to court your daughter, Seraphine. The Marquis's eyes narrowed. He was a pragmatist. Marrying a difficult daughter to a low-ranking but ambitious official was not the worst outcome. It got her off his hands and bound a potentially useful man to his house. The scandal of her recent, more reckless flirtations with the Duke of Rosewood's son made this offer seem almost prudent. Your interest is noted, Magistrate, the Marquis said slowly. We will discuss this inside. Seraphine, you will join us. As her father led a fuming Seraphine and a triumphant Kalen inside, Lysandra felt a hand on her elbow. It was Cashin, a bold move, he murmured. He bypasses the sister, who could have been his greatest ally, for the one who scorned him. Pride is a blinding poison. You seem to know a great deal about him, Lysandra said, turning to face him fully. I make it my business to know about potential threats to the realm, Cashin replied, his gaze serious. A man who rises from nothing, fueled by resentment and a bottomless ambition, is often a more dangerous weapon than an army of Karakaitai, especially if someone else aims him. And who is aiming him? Lysandra asked, her voice barely a whisper. That, Cashin said, is what I am trying to discover. And I have a feeling you might hold a piece of that puzzle, Lady Lysandra. You look at him not with the disdain of your sister, but with the knowledge of a historian who has already read the last page of his biography. The accuracy of his observation was terrifying. He saw too much. Later that evening, Jean returned with his report. His grimy face was unusually solemn. The scholar, my lady. He met a man. In a tavern near the docks. A merchant. By his clothes. But he had the look of the western steppes about him. They spoke in low voices. The man gave Kalen a purse. A heavy one. Lysandra's blood ran cold. The western steppes were the domain of the Karakait. Cashin's suspicions were correct. Kalen was not just ambitious, he was already compromising himself. In her first life, with her wealth and support, he had no need to seek foreign patronage. This desperation, born of her inaction, was making him treasonous. This changed everything. It was no longer just about personal vengeance. If Kalen was involved with the Karakaitai, he was a threat to the entire dynasty. A threat Cashin was already hunting. She had to act. She could not let this marriage happen. A union between Kalen and Silverwood, even through the despised Seraphine, would give him a platform, connections, and a veneer of respectability he could use to mask his treachery. She found her father in his study, reviewing a trade proposal. He looked tired. Father, she began, her voice soft. About Kalen's proposal, he sighed. I know. Seraphine is furious. But Lysandra, you must see the practicality. Her reputation is tarnished. This Kalen is a man with a future, however modest. It is a solution. Is it? Lysandra asked. She stepped forward, placing Jin's report on his desk. I have heard disturbing whispers about the company he keeps. A man with a future should not be consorting with merchants who have the scent of the Karakaitai on them. Marquis Silverwood picked up the report, his face hardening as he read the brief, damning lines. The pragmatist in him warred with the patriot. This is a serious accusation, Lysandra. Do you have proof? Not yet. But the Duke of Ironhold shares these concerns. He is investigating the matter personally. Her father's head snapped up. Cashin? He is involved? He believes Kalen may be a threat to the realm's security. That sealed it. The word of the Wolf of Ironhold carried immense weight. Marquis Silverwood crumpled the paper in his fist. Then the matter is settled. There will be no courtship. No marriage. I will send him away tomorrow. Relief washed over Lysandra, so potent it made her dizzy. She had done it. She had severed the tie, but as she left the study, she found Cashin waiting for her in the shadowed corridor. That was efficiently done, he said. There was no criticism in his tone, only a note of admiration. You were listening. I make it a point to listen when the security of the realm is being discussed, he said. You used my name as a lever. That was clever. You gave me the information, she countered. You all but handed me the weapon. He moved closer, the shadows clinging to him. I gave you a tool. You chose how to wield it. You could have gone to the Imperial censors. You could have confronted him yourself. But you chose the most effective path, leveraging your father's loyalty to the crown and his trust in me.
He paused. Why?
Why is it so important to you that this man does not marry your sister? This was the precipice. She could lie, obfuscate, or she could take a terrifying leap of faith. She looked up at him, into the storm of his eyes, and decided. Because in a different life, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I did marry him, and he poisoned me on his deathbed to be with her. The silence that followed was absolute. She expected disbelief, ridicule, fear. Instead, Cashin's expression did not change. He simply absorbed her words, his gaze searching her face as if looking for the ghost she carried. I see, he said finally, his voice impossibly soft. That explains the shadows in your eyes. The knowledge. He reached out, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he would touch her face. But his hand stopped just short. It also explains why you are the only person in the city who seems to see the same threat I do. He believed her. The sheer, staggering relief of it made her knees weak. What do we do now? She whispered. Now, Cashin said, his voice regaining its steel. We set a trap. We have flushed our quarry. He is desperate, denied the path he expected.
He will make a mistake.
And we will be waiting. For the first time since she had awoken in this new life, Lysandra did not feel alone. She had an ally, a dangerous, unpredictable one, but an ally nonetheless. The game was no longer just about survival.
It was about conquest.
And as she stood in the dark corridor with the wolf of iron hold, she finally felt like she had the teeth to win. The trap was set not with steel jaws, but with silk invitations and the cloying perfume of political theater. The Mid-Autumn Festival Banquet was the social event of the season, a mandatory display of loyalty and opulence held within the Jade Palace. For Lysandra and Cashin, it was the perfect arena. I end the days following their cryptic alliance. A new rhythm settled between them. Their interactions in the Silverwood Manor were brief, formal, and observed by many. But in the stolen moments, a passed note in the library, a murmured conversation in the moonlit gardens, they wove their strategy. He will be there, Cashin had said, his voice a low hum in the darkness. His new patron, Lord Meng, a minor minister with major ambitions, will parade his discovery to gain favor. Kalen's pride will demand he attend, to prove he belongs. And Seraphine? Lysandra had asked. She will be the bait, though she does not know it. Her outrage at his proposal will make her dismissive, cruel. He will crave to humble her, to prove his worth. That craving will make him reckless. Now, standing before her polished silver mirror, Lysandra assessed her own reflection as a general would a battlefield. Her gown was of deep sapphire silk, the color of a midnight sky, embroidered with silver phoenixes that seemed to take flight as she moved. It was a statement. She was not the delicate flower of the Silverwood house. She was its heir, its strength. Her hair was swept up in an intricate style, secured with pins of white jade, cold and sharp. She looked every inch the noble lady, but her eyes, older than her years, held the glint of a honed blade. Cashin, waiting to escort her and her family, was a study in contrasting shadows. His formal court robes were black, edged with the gray wolf fur of Ironhold. He wore no jewelry save for a single, heavy signet ring on his thumb. He was a splash of stark, military severity amidst the pastel-colored court peacocks. When his eyes met hers, a current of understanding passed between them. The hunt was on. The Jade Palace was a symphony of controlled extravagance. The air vibrated with the music of zither and flutes, the tinkling of laughter, and the subtle rustle of priceless silks. The emperor, a man of middle years with a weary but keen gaze, held court on the dragon throne, accepting the bows of his subjects. As Cashin predicted, Kalen was there, standing slightly behind the pompous Lord Meng. He wore the robes of his new office, but they hung on him a little too perfectly, as if he were playing dress-up. His eyes scanned the crowd, hungry and assessing, until they found Seraphine. She was a vision in rose pink, fluttering her fan and laughing too loudly at a joke from a son of the Duke of Rosewood, pointedly ignoring Kalen's existence. A muscle twitched in his jaw. The first move came during the exchange of gifts. When it was Lord Meng's turn, he presented a beautifully illuminated scroll of poetry. "A humble offering, Your Majesty," he simpered. "Penned by my own protege, the promising magistrate Kalen, in praise of your wise and harmonious reign." The emperor accepted it with a polite nod. It was a transparent attempt to gain notice, but it was Kalen's moment in the sun. He bowed deeply, the picture of humble gratitude. It was then that Cashin stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, cut through the polite murmurs like a sword. "Poetry is a noble art, Lord Meng," Cashin said, his tone deceptively casual. "It is a pity the Karakaitai have no appreciation for it. They prefer the language of troop movements and supply manifests." A startled silence fell over the immediate vicinity. Lord Meng's face went pale. Kalen froze mid-bow. Cashin continued, addressing the emperor directly. "Your Majesty, my men recently intercepted a caravan attempting to cross the border at Serpent's Tooth Pass. Its manifest listed silks and spices, but its hidden compartments contained forged imperial seals and detailed maps of our northern garrisons." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. The merchant leading it claimed patronage from a rising star in the capital's bureaucracy. A scholar, recently passed. He didn't look at Kalen. He didn't have to. Every eye in the hall swiveled to the young magistrate, who had gone as white as the jade in Lysandra's hair. A baseless accusation. Lord Meng spluttered, sweating profusely. "A tragic case of mistaken identity. My protege is a man of learning, of integrity." "Is he?" Cashin's gaze finally landed on Kalen, and it was like the weight of a glacier. "Magistrate Kalen, you are known to frequent the Inkstone district. Did you, perhaps, in your studies, ever converse with a merchant named Borjigin? A man with a scar across his brow and a fondness for kumis?" Lysandra watched Kalen's face. She saw the flicker of panic, quickly suppressed, replaced by a mask of outraged innocence. But he was shaken. Cashin had named a name. He had proof, or at least, he had enough to make Kalen believe he did. "Your Grace," Kalen said, his voice strained but firm. "I meet many people in my duties. I cannot recall every face." It was a weak deflection, and the courtiers, sharks scenting blood in the water, began to whisper. This was Lysandra's cue. She stepped forward, a vision of serene nobility. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "It is a grave matter, to be sure. Perhaps the magistrate is merely a victim of circumstance, an ambitious man unaware of the vipers who seek to use his name." She turned a gentle, seemingly sympathetic smile towards Kalen. After all, a man so dedicated to his studies, so new to the complexities of the capital, it would be easy for him to be misled. Her words appeared to be a defense, but their effect was more insidious. She was framing him as naive, gullible, a pawn. To a proud man like Kalen, it was a deeper cut than an outright accusation. It stripped him of his hard-won agency, his eyes met hers, and for a second, the mask of the humble scholar shattered. In its place was a blaze of pure, undiluted hatred. He saw her now not as a noblewoman to be used, but as an active opponent. He understood that her kindness in the hall days earlier had been a setup, that she had been playing him all along. The Emperor watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. "These are serious allegations, Duke Cashin. And a curious defense, Lady Silverwood." His wise eyes took in the entire scene. Cashin's cold certainty, Kalen's poorly concealed panic, Lord Meng's terror, and Lysandra's calculated intervention. "The matter will be investigated by the Office of Scrutiny. Magistrate Kalen, you will suspend your duties until this is resolved." It was a political death sentence. Even if he was cleared, the stench of treason would never fully leave him. The banquet continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Kalen was now a pariah. Lord Meng scurried away from him, as if he were plague-ridden. Courtiers who had moments before been curious now gave him a wide berth. Seraphine, witnessing his utter ruin, could not contain her smug triumph. As Kalen was leaving the hall, humiliated and seething, she accidentally brushed past him, her whisper loud enough for those nearby to hear. I told father you were trouble. A beggar will always return to the gutter. The look Kaelin gave her then was one of such venomous promise that Seraphine actually took a step back, her smugness replaced by a flicker of fear. Lysandra saw it all. The trap had sprung. Kaelin was publicly disgraced, his career in tatters, and his obsession with Seraphine had curdled into something darker and more dangerous. He was now a cornered, desperate animal. Later, as the banquet wound down, Lysandra found herself on a secluded balcony overlooking the palace gardens, the moon a perfect, cold pearl in the sky. The scent of osmanthus hung heavy in the air. Cashin joined her, his presence a solid, reassuring warmth in the cool night. It worked, she said, not looking at him. You broke him. We broke him, he corrected. Your timing was impeccable. You made him feel like a fool. For a man like that, it is a wound that never heals. He will not take this lying down, she murmured, the memory of the poison in her throat a phantom ache. A cornered snake is at its most deadly. I am counting on it, Cashin replied, his voice low. Now that he is desperate, he will run straight to his masters. He will seek to prove his value, to strike back. And when he moves, we will have him. Not for suspicion, but for treason in the act. He turned to face her, the moonlight carving the sharp planes of his face. You took a great risk tonight. By speaking for him, you painted a target on your own back. He knows you are his enemy now. Lysandra finally met his gaze. He has been my enemy for a lifetime, Your Grace. I am merely no longer pretending otherwise. The formal title felt strange on her tongue now. The shared conspiracy had eroded the walls between them. Cashin, he said quietly. When we are alone, call me Cashin. The intimacy of the request, the trust it implied, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the night air. She nodded. Then you must call me Lysandra. He didn't smile, but the intensity in his eyes softened, warmed. Lysandra. Her name on his lips was a vow, acknowledgement of their partnership. Below them, in the shadowed gardens, a figure slipped out of a servant's entrance, pulling a hood over its head. Even from this distance, Lysandra recognized the proud, furious gait. Kaelin. He was not returning to his humble quarters. He was moving with purpose, towards the city's dock district. Cashin followed her gaze.
See?
The snake slithers to its nest. He offered her his arm. It was not a romantic gesture, but one of solidarity, of shared purpose. Come, Lysandra, he said. The first move is over. The real game begins now. And as she took his arm, the solid strength of it an anchor in her turbulent new world, Lysandra knew he was right. The public humiliation was merely the opening gambit. The private war was about to begin. The air in the Silverwood Manor, once a sanctuary, now felt like the tense quiet before a summer storm. Kaelin's public disgrace at the banquet was the talk of the capital, a delicious scandal that was chewed over in tea houses and noble salons alike. But for Lysandra, the satisfaction was a fleeting thing, quickly replaced by a vigilant dread. A wounded animal was most dangerous when it had nothing left to lose. Cashin's network of eyes and ears, a web stretching from the palace to the docks, was stretched taut. Jean, her own little spy, reported that Kaelin had vanished from his usual haunts. He was like a ghost, but Lysandra could feel his hatred as a palpable pressure in the air, a cold spot in the warmth of her new life. The catalyst came not from a spy's report, but from a ghost of her own past. It happened during a family dinner. Seraphine, still preening from her perceived role in Kaelin's downfall, was regaling a captive and slightly horrified audience with her version of events. And the look on his face when I told him a beggar belongs in the gutter. It was priceless. He finally understood his place. Lysandra was picking at her food, her appetite gone. Each boast from Seraphine felt like a nail in a coffin. She was so focused on blocking out the sound that she barely registered the servant offering her a cup of spiced wine. She took a sip. The moment the liquid touched her tongue, her world dissolved. It was not the taste of wine. It was the taste of iron and bitter almonds. It was the ghost of the poison from her deathbed, a sensory memory so vivid it stole the breath from her lungs. The grand dining hall melted away, replaced by the oppressive silence of the sick room. She could feel the silk of her deathbed sheets, hear Kaelin's ragged breathing, see the triumphant malice in his eyes as he confessed his love for Seraphine. She choked, the cup clattering from her hand, spilling crimson like blood across the white table linen. Lysandra, her mother, cried out. Cashin was at her side in an instant, his hand on her back, his voice a low, steady anchor in the roaring sea of her panic. What is it? She couldn't speak. She could only stare at the spreading stain, her body trembling with a terror that was 20 years old and yet as fresh as this morning's dew. Her gaze snapped to Seraphine, who was watching with wide, confused eyes. There was no guilt there, only vapid surprise. It wasn't her. Not this time. The realization was a cold splash of water. This was a memory, a warning from her own soul. Kalen's final strike in her first life had been the poison. It was his signature. He would try it again. She grabbed Cashin's arm, her fingers digging into the hard muscle beneath his robe. The wine, she gasped. He's going to use poison. Understanding dawned in Cashin's stormy eyes. He didn't question her. He simply nodded, his face hardening into a mask of grim resolve. The psychological warfare was over. The physical threat had begun. Later, in the seclusion of her father's study, they pieced it together with Marquis Silverwood. The target wasn't Lysandra. Not directly. The Emperor is hosting a small, private gathering for his most trusted advisors in 3 days' time, Cashin stated, unrolling a scroll listing the attendees. To discuss the Karakaitai threat. I am on the list. So is Lord Silverwood. And so, notably, is Lord Meng, who has been scrambling to rehabilitate his reputation since the banquet. He wouldn't dare, the Marquis breathed, his face ashen. He is desperate, Lysandra countered, her voice steadier now, fueled by a cold fury. He needs to prove his value to his foreign masters and eliminate his enemies in one move. An assassination, masked as a tragic illness that befalls multiple key figures? It's audacious. It's exactly what he would do. She looked at Cashin. He's making his move. The Karakaitai want chaos. This would deliver it. Cashin's plan was set into motion with the precision of a military campaign. He went to the Emperor and the head of the Imperial Guard, sharing Lysandra's well-placed fears from an anonymous source without revealing her extraordinary knowledge. The guard was placed on high alert. Tasters were doubled. Every ingredient entering the palace kitchens was to be scrutinized, but Cashin and Lysandra knew Kalen was too clever for a simple kitchen plot. He would have a more elegant, more intimate method. The day of the private gathering arrived. The atmosphere in the designated palace pavilion was tense, despite the surface calm. The Emperor presided, his gaze sharp. Lord Silverwood was there, along with Cashin, Lord Meng, and a handful of other senior ministers and generals. Lysandra was not present, but she was far from idle. Dressed in the simple clothes of a scribe's assistant, a guise arranged by Cashin, she was positioned in an antechamber with a clear view of the proceedings through a lattice screen. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. The meeting began. Discussions of border troops, supply lines, and diplomatic envoys filled the air. Lord Meng, sweating and nervous, repeatedly tried to steer the conversation, to offer solutions that involved new trade partnerships that made Cashin's eyes narrow. Then, the tea was served. A palace attendant, his movements smooth and practiced, poured the steaming jasmine tea for each dignitary from a magnificent celadone pot. It was a ritual of peace and contemplation, but Lysandra's eyes were locked not on the pot, but on the attendant. There was something in the way he held himself, a tension in his shoulders that didn't belong to a lowly servant. And then, as he poured Lord Meng's cup, his sleeve brushed the rim. It was a fleeting, seemingly accidental gesture, but Lysandra saw it. She saw the tiny, almost invisible droplet that fell from a hidden capsule in his sleeve into the minister's cup. Lord Meng, distracted and eager to ingratiate himself, didn't notice it was a targeted assassination. Lord Meng was the loose end, the man who could directly link the Karakaitai to a member of the imperial court. His death would silence him and sow terror among the others. Now, Lysandra whispered into the silence of the antechamber. As if on her command, Cashin, who had been watching the attendant with hawk-like intensity, moved. He didn't shout. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply stood up, his movement fluid and terrifyingly fast, and caught the attendant's wrist as he moved to pour the next cup. The room froze. A curious method of serving tea, Cashin said, his voice dangerously soft. He twisted the man's arm, and a small, hollowed-out bone capsule fell from his sleeve and clattered onto the floor. Chaos erupted. Guards surged forward. Lord Meng stared at his teacup as if it were a viper, his face a grotesque mask of terror, but Lysandra's attention was elsewhere. Through the lattice, she saw a flicker of movement in the shadowed garden outside the pavilion. A figure, watching the scene unfold. A figure she would know anywhere. Kalen. He hadn't come to do the deed himself. He had come to watch, to savor his triumph. And now, he was witnessing his failure. Their eyes met through the screen, across the manicured garden and the panic-stricken pavilion. The hatred in his gaze was a physical force, a final, silent scream of rage. He knew she was there. He knew she had beaten him again. Then he was gone, melting back into the shadows like the snake he was. The trap had been sprung, but the primary quarry had escaped. The attendant, under the immediate and brutal interrogation of the Imperial Guard, confessed almost immediately. He was a Karakaitai agent, planted years ago. He named Borjigin the merchant. And he confirmed he was acting on orders passed down from a new, anonymous benefactor within the capital, a scholar who knew the palace routines. They had Kalen's name, linked now by two sources to treason. An imperial warrant was issued for Kalen's arrest for high treason. That night, Cashin found Lysandra on the same balcony where they had stood after the banquet. The moon was hidden behind clouds, the world cast in deep shadow. "He's gone to ground," Cashin said, his voice tight with frustration. "The docks, the tenements, his old haunts, he's vanished. He knows the city is closing in on him." Lysandra wrapped her arms around herself, the cold of the night seeping into her bones. "He hasn't vanished. He's done with subtlety. He's failed in politics. He's failed in assassination. There's only one thing left he can take from me. The one thing he thinks I care about." Cashin went still. "Seraphine. He blames her for starting his humiliation. He believes I love her as a sister. Taking her, hurting her, it's the only way he is left to wound me." She turned to him, her eyes gleaming in the darkness with a terrifying clarity. "He's not hiding. He's hunting." As if summoned by her words, a frantic scream tore through the quiet of the Silverwood Manor, coming from the direction of the family quarters. It was Seraphine. Without a word, Lysandra and Cashin ran, their shared purpose a tangible force between them. They reached Seraphine's chamber to find the door splintered, hanging from a single hinge.
Inside, the room was in disarray.
A spilled perfume bottle filled the air with the cloying scent of crushed roses. Leora, Seraphine's mother, was wailing hysterically on the floor. Amidst the chaos lay a single, discarded object. It was a hairpin, not just any hairpin. It was the butterfly hairpin Seraphine had worn the day she met Kalen on the road. The one she had flaunted while tossing him a single coin of contempt. Beside it, pinned to the floor by a small, sharp dagger of distinctly Karakaitai design, was a note scrawled on a piece of torn parchment. It read, "A life for a life. Come alone to the place where it began. Or I will send her back to you in pieces." The note was a serpent's hiss on parchment. The place where it began. There was no question. The dusty road where Seraphine's carriage had stopped, where a single copper coin had sown a harvest of vengeance. "You are not going alone." Cashin's voice was flat, final, the voice of the wolf of iron hold brooking no argument. He was already strapping on a light leather cuirass over his dark robes, checking the daggers at his belt. "He said alone," Lysandra said, her own voice surprisingly steady. The initial panic had crystallized into a cold, sharp focus. This was the endgame, and he will be expecting you to obey. Which is why you will not. Cashin's eyes met hers, stormy and resolute. "He wants a victim. He will get a reckoning. I will be your shadow. My men will be the net." There was no time for a more elaborate plan. Every moment wasted was a moment Kalen could spend torturing Seraphine. Or worse. Lysandra changed into a dark, practical riding outfit, her mind racing. She was walking into a trap, but she was no longer the prey. She was the bait in a larger snare. They rode out under a cloak of clouds, the moon a faint smudge behind them. Cashin melted into the landscape behind her, a wraith of vengeance. A handful of his most trusted guards, men who moved with the silence of wolves, flanked the area, surrounding the designated meeting spot. The road was deserted at this hour, a pale ribbon under the starless sky. The abandoned watchtower where Kalen had likely taken shelter loomed in the distance, a broken finger pointing at the heavens. The air was cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. As she approached the spot where she had first watched him from her balcony, a figure stepped out from the shadows of a gnarled oak tree. It was Kalen. He held a lamp, its flickering light carving grotesque shadows on his face. He looked older, his features sharpened by hatred and desperation, but his eyes burned with the same fanatical fire she remembered from her deathbed. "Lysandra," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "Or should I say, my twice-fated wife. You came. I knew you would. For her. He gestured vaguely towards the watchtower. Where is she, Kaelin? Lysandra demanded, stopping a dozen paces from him. Alive. For now. His smile was a ghastly thing. Did you enjoy my performance at the palace? A shame your pet wolf intervened. But it doesn't matter. This is better. More personal. This was always personal for you, Lysandra countered, her voice cutting through the night. Long before I ever crossed your path. Your pride was always your god, and anyone who slighted it was a heretic to be burned. You think you understand me? He spat, the lamp shaking in his hand. You, who had everything handed to you. You gave me charity, and you expected eternal gratitude. You wanted a well-trained dog, not a husband. Seraphine, she saw me for what I was. A man to be conquered. And I will conquer her. By breaking her, I break you. You break nothing, Lysandra said, taking a step forward. You are a pawn who thought himself a king. The Karakaitai used you. Kashin has the merchant, Borjigin. He has the palace attendant. They have named you. The emperor has signed your death warrant. You are already a dead man walking. A flicker of uncertainty, of fear, crossed his face before being submerged in rage. Lies. I am the master of my fate. I offered you a chance, Lysandra. In another life, I offered you everything. And you spat on it. He was spiraling, his logic unraveling. This was the dangerous moment. I spat on nothing, she said, her voice dropping, filled with the weight of her truth. I gave you everything. My love, my loyalty, my family's influence. And you repaid me with indifference, with secret longing for my sister, and finally, with poison. I died with the taste of your betrayal on my tongue, Kaelin. I remember it all. The confession, spoken aloud into the night, stunned him into silence. His eyes widened, the mad certainty faltering. He stared at her as if truly seeing her for the first time, not the noble woman of this life, but the wronged wife of the last. You're mad, he whispered, but the conviction was gone from his voice. No, a new voice cut through the darkness, cold and absolute. She is telling the truth. Kashin emerged from the shadows behind Kaelin, a dagger in his hand. He moved with such silence that Kaelin jumped, whirling around, the lamp casting wild arcs of light. It explains everything, Kashin continued, his gaze locked on Kaelin. Her knowledge of your character. Her certainty of your methods. Her fear of poison. You did this before. And you are trying to do it again. Kaelin looked between them, a trapped animal. The elegant framework of his revenge was crumbling, exposed as the pathetic, petty thing it was. He had been outmaneuvered, outwitted, and now his deepest, most impossible secret was known. It doesn't matter, he screamed, his voice cracking. I still have her. I still win. He threw the lamp at Kashin, who dodged it effortlessly. In the sudden darkness, Kaelin drew a short, curved sword from his robe's Karakaitai make and lunged not at Kashin, but at Lysandra. He never reached her. Kashin was faster. He moved like a striking wolf, his own blade meeting Kaelin's with a shriek of steel. The fight was brutal, short, and utterly one-sided. Kaelin was a scholar with a sword. Kashin was a warrior born. In 3 moves, Kashin had disarmed him, the foreign blade spinning away into the dirt. In a 4th, he had Kaelin on his knees, Kashin's dagger at his throat. The tower, Kashin said, his voice a low growl. Where is she? Kaelin just laughed, a broken, hopeless sound. See for yourself. One of Kashin's men emerged from the direction of the watchtower, his face grim. Your Grace, my lady. We found the Lady Seraphine. She is alive. But she has been drugged. And he cut her hair. All of it. Lysandra felt a cold wave of relief and pity. He had taken her vanity, her most prized possession. It was a cruelty perfectly tailored to Seraphine. Kashin's men secured Kaelin, binding his hands tightly. The fight had gone out of him. He knelt in the dirt, had bowed, the picture of utter defeat. Lysandra walked over to him. She looked down at the man who had been her husband, her murderer, and her obsession for 2 lifetimes. All she felt was a vast, empty stillness. You told me once that marrying me was your greatest regret, she said, her voice quiet but clear in the hushed night. But it was my greatest folly. I mistook ambition for strength, and pride for character. You were never worthy of the love I offered you. Not in that life, and certainly not in this one. Kaelin did not look up. He had nothing left to say. Kashin came to stand beside her. It's over, Lysandra. She looked from Kaelin, broken in the dirt, towards the tower where her shallow, vain sister was being rescued, her beauty shorn. She thought of the poison, the betrayal, the long, painful history that had led to this moment. No, she said, finally feeling the ghost of her past life release its grip on her soul. It's just beginning. The clouds above them chose that moment to break, allowing a single shaft of moonlight to illuminate the road. It shone not on Kaelin, but on Lysandra and Cashin, standing together, the past finally defeated, the future waiting to be written. The price of a life had been paid, not in blood, but in the utter dissolution of a hateful dream. The trial of Kaelin of Oakhaven was swift, secret, and merciless. Held within the sealed chambers of the Office of Scrutiny, it was less a legal proceeding and more a formal accounting of his crimes. The testimony of the captured Karakaitai merchant, Borjajan, and the palace attendant was damning. They laid bare a plot not just to assassinate, but to destabilize the Azure dynasty, creating a power vacuum for their nomadic masters to exploit. Kaelin, his spirit broken, offered no defense. He had gambled everything on a final, desperate act of vengeance and had lost. The Emperor's judgment was final: death by beheading for high treason. His name was to be struck from all imperial records, his existence erased as if he had never been. The sentence was carried out at dawn in a silent, private courtyard, witnessed only by the executioner, the presiding magistrate, and Duke Cashin of Ironhold, who stood as a representative of the crown he had helped save. There was no crowd, no glory, only the quiet, efficient end of a man who had chosen hatred over honor. News of the foiled plot and Kaelin's execution sent ripples through the court. Lord Meng, exposed as a gullible fool, was stripped of his rank and banished to a remote estate. The Silverwood name, however, emerged not with the taint of association, but burnished with the glow of loyalty and sacrifice. Marquis Silverwood was praised for his vigilance, and whispers began to circulate about the remarkable perception of his eldest daughter, whose quiet counsel had proven so invaluable for Seraphine. The price was both public and deeply personal. She was returned to Silverwood Manor, physically unharmed but psychologically shattered. The loss of her beautiful hair was a profound humiliation, a visible scar of her ordeal. For weeks, she remained secluded in her chambers, refusing to see anyone. The vain, frivolous girl who had defined herself by her beauty and her ability to manipulate was gone, replaced by a hollow, trembling creature. It was Lysandra who finally breached her solitude. She entered without ceremony, carrying a simple box. Seraphine sat by the window, a plain scarf covering her shorn head, her eyes red-rimmed and empty. "He's dead," Lysandra said softly. Seraphine flinched, but did not look up. "I know. He is gone, Seraphine. But you are still here." "What is left of me?" she whispered, the question a plea. Lysandra opened the box. Inside was not a jeweled hairpiece or a pot of cream, but a deed. "Father has signed over the management of the family orchards in the Southern Valley to you. The tenants, the accounts, the yield, it is all yours to manage. It is a productive asset, and it needs a sharp mind." Seraphine stared at the parchment, confusion cutting through her despair.
Why?
"Why would you?" "After everything because you are a Silverwood," Lysandra said, her voice firm. "And Silverwoods do not wallow. We rebuild. You wanted power and influence? This is where it truly begins. Not with a flutter of eyelashes at a banquet, but with the respect earned from managing a thriving estate. Your worth was never in your hair, sister. It is in here." She tapped her own temple. "And it is time you started using it." It was not an absolution, but an offer. A path forward. A challenge. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of something other than self-pity shone in Seraphine's eyes, doubt, then a dawning, determined clarity. She reached out a trembling hand and took the deed. The Mid-Autumn Festival arrived again, a year after the banquet that had shattered Kaelin's ambitions. The Jade Palace was once more filled with light and music, but the atmosphere was different. It was a celebration of security, of a crisis averted. This time, Lysandra did not stand on the periphery. She stood beside Cashin, her hand resting on his arm, as he received the formal gratitude of the Emperor. The monarch did not offer them gold or land. He offered something far more valuable. "Duke Cashin," the Emperor's voice carried through the hall. "You have served the dynasty with unwavering loyalty and fearsome capability. And Lady Lysandra Silverwood," he turned his wise gaze to her, Your house has proven its mettle, and your insight has been a shield for us all. A strong realm needs strong pillars. It is our decree that the bonds between our great houses be strengthened." He raised his cup. "Let it be known that we fully bless the union between Duke Cassian of Ironhold and Lady Lysandra of House Silverwood. May your alliance be as steadfast as the mountains you guard and as fruitful as the valleys you cultivate." It was an imperial endorsement, a command masquerading as a blessing. The hall erupted in applause. It was the most powerful political match of the season, but as Cassian turned to her, his stormy eyes soft with a promise that had nothing to do with politics, Lysandra knew it was so much more. Their wedding, a month later, was a spectacle of both martial simplicity and noble opulence. Warriors from Ironhold stood guard alongside Silverwood retainers. They were married not in a temple, but in the ancestral hall of the Silverwood Manor, under the watchful eyes of their family banners, the Silver Phoenix and the Grey Wolf. When Cassian lifted her bridal veil, his gaze held no trace of the cold strategist or the fearsome wolf. There was only a profound, awestruck reverence. "My Lysandra," he murmured, for her ears alone. "My wife. My partner. At last." The celebration lasted for days, but the moment they were alone in their chambers within the newly opened Ironhold residence in the capital, the world narrowed to just the two of them. There were no ghosts at their feast, no shadows of past lives. There was only the present, vivid and real. "Are you happy?" he asked later, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw as they lay entwined in the quiet dark. Lysandra thought of the poison, the betrayal, the long, lonely death. She thought of the fear, the second chances, the fierce, hard-won battles of her new life. She looked at this man, her husband, who had seen the darkest parts of her history and had not flinched, who had stood beside her not as a protector to a victim, but as a partner to an equal. "I am home," she whispered, and it was the truest thing she had ever said. The peach trees in the garden of the Ironhold residence were in full, glorious bloom, their petals drifting on the warm spring breeze like pink snow. Lysandra sat on a silk cushion beneath the largest tree, a contented smile on her face as she watched the scene before her. Cassian, the formidable duke, the wolf of Ironhold, was on his hands and knees, giving a giggling toddler a ride on his back. Their son, Lion, named for the strength of the mountain cat, had his father's stormy eyes and his mother's determined set to his chin. A servant approached and bowed. "Your Grace, a message from the Southern Valley. The Lady Seraphine sends her regards and the first box of peaches from the harvest. She reports the yield is up 40% from last year and wishes to discuss investment in a new irrigation system." Lysandra took the letter, a genuine smile touching her lips. Seraphine had not become a saint. She was still sharp-tongued and could be ruthlessly pragmatic. But the vain, manipulative girl was gone, replaced by a capable, respected businesswoman who had found her power not in a man's affection, but in her own competence. The sisterly bond between them was now one of mutual respect, a quiet understanding forged in the fires of shared trauma. Cassian collapsed playfully onto the grass, scooping a squealing lion into his arms. He looked over at Lysandra, his expression one of utter, unguarded contentment. "It seems your sister is trying to corner the peach market," he said, a grin tugging at his lips. "Let her," Lysandra replied, setting the letter aside. "She has earned it." She looked from her son's laughing face to her husband's loving gaze, then out to the blossoms dancing in the breeze. The same blossoms that had smiled upon her murder in another life now witnessed her profound peace. The greatest regret of her first life had been a man who saw her as a stepping stone. The greatest joy of this one was a man who saw her as the destination. The heart could change, it was true, but it could also heal and grow and learn to love again, more deeply than before. The peach blossoms, blushing in the spring sun, nodded in agreement, their silent poetry a benediction on her new dynasty.